Why, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of my favorite series. This time we are talking about my favorite trilogies of all time. This was very difficult. I actually spent a little bit of time coming up with everything that I could. I actually even have notes that I'll be probably looking at and obviously editing this out of the video. But I am really excited to tell you my top 10 favorite trilogies of all time. Now there is a rule. Now the rule is I want these trilogies to only be standalone. So what I mean by that, I mean in the title of the films. So that means in the title of the films, there's only three movies. So sorry, Toy Story 4 is about to come out. So to me, I'm not going to have that as a trilogy. I know that's a nitpicky rule, but that's kind of how I wanted it to be for this video. I wanted to just have, you know, 3 independent films as their own thing. So that means, yeah, you probably guessed it, no Star Wars. However, the original trilogy of Star Wars is definitely up there, and I'm really excited to even honorable mention it. There's a really great honorable mentions here with some of these movies that I definitely think would be a really great trilogy. So Indiana Jones, obviously, I would say it was a really great trilogy as well. That would definitely make this list, but like I said, I'm making this rule to where it's only 3 films in the title. Alright, so that means we can start. Number 10 is the War Trilogy. It's the last trilogy I just finally watched. This is Roberto Rossellini's War Trilogy. He's an Italian director in the 40s. The first film, Rome Open City, came out in 1945. The second movie, Paisan, came out in 1946. And then finally, the last film in the series, Germany Year Zero, came out in 1948. Now these are all vastly different films, and they're very loosely related. Now, when I say they're loosely related, they're honestly all revolving around war. World War II, the Nazi occupation of Italy, all the way to Germany, obviously in Berlin, at the very, very, very end of the war in war-torn Berlin. So this is a really great trilogy. This trilogy really tackles neorealism, and this is something that Italian cinema was really playing a little bit with like The Bicycle Thief a couple years later after this. But the thing I really love about this trilogy is how realistic a lot of the drama and the dialogue and the realistic lives of what's going on with everybody involved in all these films. So I'm going to kind of briefly mention each one of these films. Alright, starting with Rome Open City. This is a really great melodrama, honestly, of Nazi occupation of Italy. So this is actually filmed in the very ruins of Italy as they were occupied by Germany during the World War II. Even though they were their allies, they were definitely still there. The Nazis were still definitely there trying to help the fascists there. And the fascists obviously were hated by some of the Italian people who were living there. And the fascists were definitely hated by some of the Italians. But regardless, this film was made in kind of secrecy, kind of near the end of the war. I believe it was made in 1944, 1945 by Fellini and Robert Rossellini. Actually, I have notes here. Fellini and Sergio Amadei. I'm probably saying these names right. I'm going to butcher a lot of names. But these two directors helped Rossellini make this film, which is really amazing. And it's really actually filmed in Italy where all this crazy shit went down. And I just think that's really, really great. There's really amazing performances, and I'm going to read again, by Aldo Fabrizi, who played a father, a priest in the film, who's like a central character in the film. And we also are seeing Anna Magnini. She plays the fiancée of a resistance fighter, and she plays compelling role as a main character as well. These are the 2 people it kind of follows around, and their doings and their intertwined kind of realities of what's going on in World War II. And the really awesome, amazing thing about this film is how realistic a lot of these things are. It's really embedded in some religious undertones as well. Obviously you have the priest who is just dealing with all the things that are happening at wartime, and you don't really know how to really handle all this stuff, right? So I thought this movie was an amazing film, and actually might be my favorite of the 3. But let's actually just move on to Paisan, which is a year later in 1946. This is when the Americans actually came in to Italy. This film is actually really interesting. It is filmed in 6 different parts and 6 different elements and stories that are going involved. The first one, obviously, is just like this, rogue operation mission from about 6 American troops going into this village, trying to rescue this town away from the Nazis. And then it just goes on from there, from village to village in Sicily, all the way to Rome. There's so many different little areas and nooks and crannies, and all of those interactions you get with each one of these characters. And a lot of them very different perspectives coming from different parts of Italy, and that's what's so cool about it. There's actually lots of different Italian being spoken, actually. I want to look at Paisan right here in particular. This film, I want to say, it has a lot of different languages involved with it, not just normal Italian. There's definitely a lot of regional Italian that is really, really embedded into this film, which is really, really interesting and really, really cool. That's where that neo-realism kicks in, and you see a lot of just the interactions between all these people, and it's really interesting to see this moral tale kind of be unfolded through this terrible, terrible war that has definitely ravaged the countryside and changed the minds of a lot of the people going through. So let's actually move on to the last film in the series, Germany Year Zero, which is actually the most interesting film and kind of the most human film of them all. It also feels like it's the most raw as well. So Germany Year Zero, this film came out in 1948. It is focused more on Berlin and the kind of ruins of this German family. You have this little boy, and I'm going to look at it, I want to say he's 12 years old. He's a 12-year-old boy, Edmund, and he's got an older sibling who is an ex-Nazi member, who is really young, and he's got an older sister as well, but they're being taken care of by their sickly father. But this kid is really just kind of running around doing whatever he wants in this ruined Berlin, and really has no kind of parental advisor or anything like that. He is dealing with a lot of the things that are happening, and there's a lot of like underground resistance members still part of like the Nazi sympathizers, and they're kind of corrupting him a little bit and doing some errands and black market deals. But these films all end in a very tragic note and a very realistic type of sense, with a lot of these obviously a little bit sensationalized, but is definitely dealing with scenarios that all these people dealt with. And the thing I really love about the War Trilogy, obviously this is the most recent thing that I've seen, is how Italy is one of the only countries that really dealt with World War II in this way, at least in this sense. A lot of the other World War II films that came out around this time from America or England or France, honestly, these films kind of glorified their side, or they had some kind of propaganda-ish side, especially Germany, obviously. But there's a lot of, just really harsh reality to a lot of these things that were going on, and that's what's so insane about this. And so I know, and especially in the first film, Rome Open City, they filmed this movie in secret. And they filmed it by being a little bit occupied, and they filmed it kind of in secret, but it doesn't really feel that way, but it's a real thing. And so I'm sure I've said realism way too many times. But this is actually my number 10 pick, the War Trilogy. Fantastic, fantastic trilogy that I cannot wait to once again rediscover when I see it again very shortly. So let's actually move on from this to number 9. Alright, moving straight from Roberto Rossellini's War Trilogy, we're actually moving on to another trilogy that kind of doesn't really have much to do with each other, however they are connected in some way, and that is the Cornetto Trilogy. This is Edgar Wright's Cornetto Trilogy. We have Shaun of the Dead right here, the first film in 2004. We have Hot Fuzz in 2007. And then finally in 2013 we have The World's End. Now all of these are with Nick Frost and Simon Pegg as our titular main characters. And both of these characters play a fantastic duo in each one of these films. And they're all separate. And so let me just kind of cover a little bit of each one of them and tell you a little bit more about it. So Shaun of the Dead starts off this trilogy. And this is... The Cornetto Trilogy actually is really interesting. I want to read a little bit what Edgar Wright wrote about it, but each one of these is actually involving a Cornetto ice cream. And Cornetto ice cream is red, blue, and green, and that kind of trilogy all has different flavors. So Shaun of the Dead actually represents strawberry, the blood and gore side of things. And so that is definitely apparent in the zombie film. This is a Zom rom-com. That's what I kind of read it as. But I really love the way that Shaun of the Dead is kind of just a play on Dawn of the Dead in a way. It's just this really quiet English town, and these people are just working class individuals who go to the bar every week, and they're just having, kind of a rough blue-collar kind of life. And all of a sudden, this zombie outbreak occurs and just pretty much makes the town go crazy. they don't know how to deal with it. These guys are goofballs, and they're just having to deal with the scenario. So it's really cool, really first entry, and it's definitely very English, and I love it very, very much. I love this film, and it kind of just got me on board with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost as people. And then next, we actually move on to 2007 with Hot Fuzz. This is actually the blue side of the Cornetto ice cream, and that represents kind of the original blue flavor. So they're dealing with the police force. So these are some awesome, badass policemen right here. All right, so what I love about Hot Fuzz is it is like a buddy cop police action movie. It's a badass police action movie that is just a bunch of silly scenarios in this small English town, just like Shaun of the Dead. You'll notice that with World's End, there's this small English town kind of thing vibe to each one of these films. But with this small English town, there's a lot of mysterious murders and happenings, and a lot of the townsfolk are, you know, a little bit suspicious. There's Timothy Dalton in this movie, one of the old Bonds that I really love, and I just love all of the characters in this movie. This movie is hilarious, it's bloody, it's action-oriented, it's like a buddy cop film. It honestly reminds me of Shane Black's work with Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which actually I think came out a little bit after this, oddly enough. It's just really, really awesome play on a lot of those action films. It's like Training Day, all those kind of Lethal Weapon, and I think even self-referential things in these movies as well, quite a bit. So anyway, we're moving on from there to the final film in the series, The World's End. This one actually represents Mint Chocolate Chip. It's kind of that sci-fi alien comedy that they kind of a little bit invented. So the scenario here is Simon Pegg and Nick Frost are childhood friends. One of them still lives in this town, the other one has moved on. They used to go to the bars. This World's End challenge where they would go to each one of the bars, all 12 of the pubs, and try to get a beer from each and make it home by the end of the night. They always failed as they were younger, and so they're back together with some of their friends and trying again. You have Martin Freeman in here and a lot of other people in this film as well. We also have Pierce Brosnan, another old Bond, and just a lot of really fantastic reoccurring characters from each one of these films, besides obviously our two main characters. And this movie, they're just trying to finish this pub crawl, more or less, and some crazy things start happening with some alien and robotic kind of things. It has some mixes of Terminator in there and War of the Worlds. It's a really, really cool film. I just love this trilogy. Now they're very, like I said, there's not very many similarities between it, besides Edgar Wright obviously kind of calling this the Cornetto Trilogy. It's the ice cream trilogy. You got blood and gore, you got the police original, and then you also get the mint chocolate chip and the sci-fi kind of elements of it. So it's really cool how these are connected. They're all small English towns. They're all just goofball comedy movies in different genres. So we got a zombie movie, an action adventure movie, and a sci-fi movie. It's really cool. I really enjoyed this trilogy, and I would highly recommend you check this trilogy out. So let's actually move on to number 8. So moving on to number 8 is where I'm going to probably butcher a lot of names. We have the Apu Trilogy. Now, Sajid Ray, I believe I said that correctly, made 3 films in the 50s which were phenomenal, borrowing from neo-realistic tradition that Rossellini kind of put with some of his Italian films, and then the Bengali realistic lifestyle of the natives of India. We have this amazing trilogy that's really humanistic and really just kind of tackles a lot of things that really, from the Western perspective, wasn't seen. So we have Pather Panchali, which came out in 1955. Abarajito, probably said that correct. Said that wrong. 1956. And then we also have Apur Sansur, which came out in 1959. So these films are all following Apu, as you can see right here. This amazing Criterion release right here. I love this trilogy. This is another movie trilogy that I have recently seen, just like the War Trilogy. I got this a few months ago, but I loved every bit about this trilogy. So let me just kind of mention a little bit about each one of the films and kind of the setup of what each one entails, right? So the first one, Pather Panchali, this is actually where Apu is really young and he's living with his mother, his older sister, his father, and his kind of old aunt. This aunt who's really, really old. And his father is actually sent off more or less to try to find work away in the city. They live in the countryside, and so they're living in this kind of little villa and they're very poor and they don't really have very much money, but you're learning about all the small little delicate intimacies of everyday lifestyle for Apu and his family. And there's a lot of really great moments in this film, a lot of human moments, a lot of comedic moments. There's a lot of moments that kind of just touch at the, you know, there's the mundane and the normal and the average things that are going on about things. Nothing's really spectacular besides the fact that it's very Ozu-esque. And so when I say that, I mean it's those small details really matter and really kind of get at the heart of everyday life and why life is so special. And so there's an event, some tragedies occur in this film that I don't really want to spoil, which will lead into the next few films as Apu gets older. So next I'll just move on to the Unvanquished, which I'll just call it for that. That's the unabridged title, the American title of this, Apargito. And this one is where Apu's a little bit older, and he's pretty much going to school. He has moved to the city with some of his family, and then we are seeing him kind of unfold and being interested in science and Western medicine, and he's just really kind of growing distance from a particular family member, and you'll see that unfold in this film. And a lot of those things that I was already mentioning, where you have a lot of the intimate kind of delicate moments that are not at all, you know, Hollywoodized or glamorized in a very realistic, neo-realist kind of sense. And so that's what's really great about this film. And then finally, you see Apu Sansur as Apu is like a young adult. He's a writer. He has gone away from the university a little bit and kind of just trying to find his own pathway. You also see a little bit of a romantic awakening in this film, and you see him try to discover love. Now, each of these films have tragedies involving all sorts of different members of Apu's life, and I really want to get into the details of those because I really want you to kind of see this unfold. So what I really love about these films is it really just kind of gets at the heart of familial matters, spiritual matters, just humanity in general, and there's like coming of age elements of this entire trilogy, coming to age to adulthood, discovering things about yourself and discovering things about your family and just all sorts of things, tragedy unbound, drama involved with everyday kind of life. This is something that naturally needs to unfold as you're watching this trilogy. This is something that is definitely for the patient viewer, and I feel like this is a trilogy that I think a lot of people should check out. If you have not seen the Apu Trilogy, it's a fantastic ride. I hope this trilogy will actually deepen your relationships with other humans and understand how precious life is, and that's what I love so much about the Apu Trilogy. So let's actually move on from there to number 7. Okay, we're doing a hard shift from India all the way to a kind of more modern age right now. We are actually talking about Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Trilogy. We have Batman Begins, we have Dark Knight, and we have The Dark Knight Rises. So this came out in 2005, 2008, and finally in 2013. Christopher Nolan crafted this really gritty and realistic sense of what Batman has translated from the comic books all the way to this current vision of Christopher Nolan. And he borrowed a lot from Frank Miller from the 80s. I think I really love this trilogy for several reasons. So Christopher Nolan and David Goyer, who wrote this story with Christopher Nolan, has Batman grounded in reality to a kind of believable universe that I feel like could actually exist. There are definitely some things happening in this trilogy that are a little bit outside the realm of possibilities, but it's definitely a little grittier, a little darker, and really kind of focuses on those elements. And that's what's so great about this trilogy. Now, I'm sure most of you have seen The Dark Knight, or The Dark Knight Rises, or even Batman Begins, of course, but I just want to mention a little bit about each one and why these films are so great. And so, with Batman Begins, this is actually my favorite film of the entire trilogy. I think this is where we really get an unraveling of Christian Bale as Batman, as Bruce Wayne. Honestly, I think Christian Bale is the best Bruce Wayne. I think he did the best job here out of everybody who's ever played Batman, for Bruce Wayne in particular. Michael Keaton is the best Batman. Changed my mind. But anyway, going back to Batman Begins, you actually see Christian Bale kind of become Batman. You see him go into the League of Shadows with Ra's al Ghul. There's lots of ways to say it. A lot of people say wrong different things. But anyway, Liam Neeson plays that amazing character, kind of as a father figure and also a mentor, but a really corrupted and dark one. And you see him grow up. You see Christian Bale's character as this, you know, billionaire who pretty much has had most of the things handed to him, but with no father figure, no mother, none of that. He has Alfred as his caretaker, but for the most part, he's just a spoiled guy who goes off to do this one thing to kind of just better himself. And he comes back and starts becoming the Caped Crusader and starts saving Gotham. And that's what's so cool about this. You have Scarecrow in this, played by Cillian Murphy. You have just an amazing cast. Let me just read off the cast. Christian Bale, Liam Neeson, Michael Caine as Alfred. We have Katie Holmes in the first film as Rachel. Gary Oldman as Detective Gordon. Cillian Murphy, as I said, as Scarecrow. Morgan Freeman. And there's just so many great people in this film, and it really just kind of shows you the world that Christopher Nolan was building initially. So let's actually move on from there to The Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight is actually probably the most famous film of the trilogy. This is the one where Heath Ledger sadly passed away playing this character, and he posthumously won an Oscar for it in the Best Supporting Actor role. But this wasn't his last film. But he definitely got so invested into this film as the Joker, he kind of slipped away and then finally passed away, unfortunately. But this kind of deepens the story for Batman Begins. It's all about this theme of chaos, right and wrong. What's going on is the things that Batman Begins started, kind of showing, which was this hope. It kind of questions that and puts it all on a chaotic sense. So, adding to Heath Ledger, we also have Aaron Eckhart as Two-Face, and he is an amazing Two-Face. I think he does a fantastic job. Now, there are some really great moments about this film, but there's also some moments that I feel like the pacing is a little bit off, and that's why it's probably not my favorite. It's definitely my second favorite of the Batman, but the pacing is a little bit, jumbled. But I think this movie is very, very great and a very fantastic film. I love how Detective Gordon. I love how Gary Oldman plays this character, who is just so good. He is just like so convincing. There's so many great performances in this film. Obviously, Heath Ledger plays the Joker, and I honestly think he is definitely one of the best Jokers out there. And this movie is filled with performances, great cinematography, a great Hans Zimmer score throughout this entire trilogy. I haven't mentioned that yet. But there's a lot of really great stunts work as well, and there's just a lot of really, really great dialogue. And for the most part, I think Christopher Nolan put together a masterpiece with this one. So finally, we're moving on to 2012. I think I said 2013 earlier. I meant 2012. Dark Knight Rises. We have a broken Batman from the ashes of what happened prior. Gotham is in chaos again, once again, but this time we have Tom Hardy as Bane, as our new villain, kind of just bringing Gotham to its knees and more or less questioning whether or not Gotham needs saved or not from Batman. And I just love this film because I remember watching this one in theaters and just really enjoying every moment of it. It's definitely probably the weakest of the three. However, I think this is a solid ending to a trilogy that I think really solidifies this as a standalone kind of thing in this universe with a lot of different people. We also have Joseph Gordon-Levitt in this film as Robin. But I also forgot to mention Maggie Gyllenhaal from Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises. She's kind of reprised the role as Rachel, and she does fantastic work as here. And you also have Marion Cotillard in this movie as well as Ra's al Ghul's son, as Ra's al Ghul's daughter, and Talia al Ghul. And I just really love a lot of moments about this movie. The score is fantastic. There's just a lot of upbeat kind of things, and there's a really great theme of just renewal and hope, and that's honestly what this film's about. So I actually think this is a really great trilogy that Christopher Nolan has crafted, and honestly it's one of the best adaptations of Batman we'll probably ever see. And I actually am really thankful this trilogy exists, and I am happy to say it's on the list. So let's actually move on from there to number 6. Alright, moving on to number 6, we have another trilogy that is very loosely connected, very, very loosely. Sergio Leone's The Man with No Name trilogy. So we have The Fistful of Dollars coming out in 1964. We have For a Few Dollars More in 1965. And finally, the most famous one, The Good and Bad, the Ugly, from 1966. Each one of these films are starring Clint Eastwood in a different role for each one of these movies, but definitely is about an unnamed man. He usually has a nickname in each one of the films. So, A Fistful of Dollars is the first in the franchise, and it's 1964 when this movie came out. This is practically a remake of Yojimbo from Akira Kurosawa, which came out a few years prior to this, but This is the Italian spaghetti western that Sergio Leone wanted to create with Clint Eastwood, who actually, funny enough, is like the Italian kind of western. It's like an anti-western. This is kind of what he was going for with these films. And you also have an amazing score by Ennio Morricone, who is one of the greatest composers out there. It's kind of the films that really solidified him as a composer, and it just has such great and memorable things for each one of these films. So like I said, for a Fistful of Dollars, we have this unknown man who comes to this town and more or less sees that this town is bickering. It's between two gangs and two sides of this town, and he decides to play both of them and kind of play on their weaknesses to get some money on the side, and it kind of just unfolds from there. I mean, if you've seen Yojimbo, you know about kind of what happens in this film. And it kind of, you see this anti-hero of Clint Eastwood who is definitely doing this for money, but at the same time, he's definitely a hero because he's definitely doing some things to kind of stop some of the bad that is going around on him, but he's just getting money for it. So it's really, really interesting. And honestly, it's a little bit more gritty and more realistic take on probably a lot of the people who were in the West. It's definitely not the John Wayne Western that you are used to. And the thing I really like about this film is that I guess Sergio did not know English, and Clint Eastwood came to him to play this role, and somehow they worked it out with his stunt double, Clint Eastwood's stunt double, and they connected. And it's definitely filmed for like Italian and American audiences in a weird way. It's like a John Ford film meets Akira Kurosawa, like I said. So moving on from A Fistful of Dollars, we have For a Few Dollars More in 1965. We have Clint Eastwood, and we also have Lee Van Cleef, who are bounty hunters, and they're going for some gold. And that's actually another thing that, like I said, kind of is connected to this character of this man with no name, even though they're completely different names and different characters as well. They're all kind of looking for money, right? The thing I like about this movie is there's definitely a lot of just like long takes and a lot of close-up shots that are really reminiscent of each one of these films that Sergio Leone kind of puts in pieces together, and this western towns that he's just like, unfolding. And these western towns and scenarios that are a lot of non-plots. A lot of things aren't really happening, and it's really interesting just how the score, the background, the cinematography, and then the acting can go a long way in a lot of things that are really not that interesting, but really are very interesting. And I think that's really cool with this one. So actually moving on to that, we're going to talk about the final one, which is the most famous one, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Now this movie is amazing. I really enjoy the opening shot of this film. It's an insane opening shot, and it kind of just shows you the roles of Clint Eastwood, the good. We have Lee Van Cleef as the bad. And then finally for the ugly, we have Eli Wallach, who is just, he's like the rat. And I love all of these characters, and you just kind of get a sense of what they're all doing. They're all actually after Confederate gold in the midst of the Civil War. And, the opening to this film is kind of what Sergio Leone is going to do later on, Once Upon a Time in the West. But I just really love the scenarios he puts all of these people in. And a lot of these just, just sweat and really bad dubbed English, and is just really gritty and dark and gross, and I don't know, it's really reminiscent of probably what life was in the West in a weird way. And I just really enjoy the scenarios that each of these characters are presented. Some of them have to team up to fight one of the other ones, and vice versa. And it ends in an also really, really great way too. We have the Mexican standoff, one of the greatest endings you'll ever see to a film, and it just keeps going. And it's a really long film. Each of these movies are fairly long, but like I said, each of them are with a million great things in each one of them. Great cinematography, great soundtrack, great score, great acting. Definitely some of the dub might mess with some people, but I actually think this is what makes these films classic films. I also love Clint Eastwood's performance, and each one of them, he has different names in each one of them. And I think is really interesting that these films are kind of just the films that Sergio Leone kind of crafted with Clint Eastwood in a way to kind of put Clint Eastwood on the map for a sense for all of us. And so anyway, this is my number 6 pick. I really love this trilogy, and I hope you do too. So let's actually move on from there to number 5. Alright, so moving on from there, we're actually switching it quite a bit up to an animated trilogy from DreamWorks, actually. We have How to Train Your Dragon, How to Train Your Dragon 2, and then finally How to Train Your Dragon 3, The Hidden World, which is not on me because it's still in theaters. And so I really love this trilogy. The first one came out in 2010, the second one came out in 2014, and then finally the one that's in theaters is in 2019. So what I really love about this trilogy is that it has lots of really great themes in it. It's a coming-of-age story, it's a family story, it's an anti-war story, it's a story about acceptance and understanding our enemies and kind of becoming friends with them, and it's just a lot of really great messages and situations and scenarios for kids and for adults. It makes me really emotional every single time I watch each of these films. So let me just kind of name off some of the people who are voicing a lot of these characters. Jay Baruchel is playing our main character of Hiccup. We also have Gerard Butler in it, Craig Ferguson, Jonah Hill, America Ferrera. We have Kit Harington in the second one, Djimon Hounsou. Kate Blanchett joins a role. We also have F. Murray Abraham, the more recent in the last Hidden World. So you have all sorts of different amazing actors and actresses involved in each one of these films. And we have T.J. Miller, who was in the first two, Kristen Wiig as well. But it's really just about Hiccup and Toothless. Toothless is a Night Fury. He's a really, really rare dragon who is kind of just, it's feared. It's like a legendary dragon. But I really love how the story unfolds with, in the first one, we have these Vikings in the town of Björk, and these are Vikings who hunt dragons, and they have been doing it for centuries, and that's kind of how things are. But you see Hiccup and Toothless start forming a bond and changing everyone's mind. So that moves on to the second one, where the second one involves all of the dragons are kind of being utilized for their strengths, and they're friends with people in the town folks of Björk. And a lot of these relationships are being called into question with a lot of the things going on in the story itself. And then finally in the third one, it seems like they've been just doing way too much work. They're getting overpopulated with dragons and humans, and they just want to make those dragons safe, so they're going to try to find the hidden world. So that's pretty much just the story in a nutshell. But what's really fascinating about this trilogy is the animation is stunning. DreamWorks did a fantastic job of animating all of these characters. There's an emotional connectivity to each one of these movies that I feel is really deep and really enriching. And I really love how this is a film for adults and for children. And I really love that aspect because this is going to teach a lot of young people about a lot of different things that adults have to deal with, but you know, children have to as well, but they have to kind of deal with it in a way that kind of is crafted for them, for their eyes. And I really love that aspect about these films. It's just such a charming trilogy, and I really hope that there's only 3 of them. I just love this trilogy so much. Really great acting and voice acting from all of these people. And yeah, it's just something you need to check out. If you haven't seen How to Train Your Dragon, watch all 3 of these films. They're fantastic. And that's why it's my number 5. So let's actually move on to number 4. So moving on from How to Train Your Dragon, we actually have a pretty legendary trilogy and the Godfather trilogy. Francis Ford Coppola, we all know his name. He directed 2 phenomenal films, and then we also have the third one in 1990. But we have 1972's The Godfather, 1974's The Godfather Part 2, and 1990's The Godfather Part 3. So this is the Corleone family. We are following Vito Corleone. At the very, very beginning of this film, it is half a wedding, half a revenge story. This is a really crazy film, and everyone I know has seen this movie probably a million times and probably have heard a lot about this film already. There's been probably a lot of analysis of each one of these films, quite a bit. I honestly just want to talk about the performances from a lot of different characters that I'll probably read off besides Al Pacino and Marlon Brando and Robert De Niro. So besides that, this is based on a novel by Mario Puzo. This is following lots of different people. We got John Cazale as Frito, James Caan as Vito. We also have Diane Keaton and Robert Duvall in this film as well. And there's just lots of people in this film. But okay, so in the first Godfather, this movie is just has legendary performances, especially by Marlon Brando as the Don. You know, we see a lot of really great, fantastic performances by Al Pacino as well as Michael Corleone. I just really love how this is a family story from like the early 1900s, when we have Vito, who moved away from Italy, from Sicily, to New York, and all the way up to like the 1980s, where we end up in the third Godfather. So I'm not really going to mention much about the story or anything. I'm sure you've heard a little bit about it, but it really follows Vito Corleone and also Michael Corleone. And we have the Don here, who eventually gets replaced by his son, also another Don. And then just finally, we have the Don's empire, as he is just really trying to submit himself and his family business into something that's definitely not on the radar of the FBI or the CIA. But anyway, what I really love about this trilogy is, just like I said, the performances. The score is phenomenal. The dialogue is some of the best dialogue I have ever heard. It just really sucks you in to this family that are all a bunch of just, you know, awful people. And these are just people who are doing awful things to each other, but at the same time, you can see a lot of the values kind of instilled in each one of them, and as there's, you know, themes of honor, of family, of values, of revenge. It's like a modern-day Shakespeare, and that's what's so great about this trilogy, and what's so great about the characters that Francis Ford Coppola has created here. And I just really love the performances by, you know, each of these characters, especially in Marlon Brando's character in the first one. And then we also see Robert De Niro play a younger version of Marlon Brando's character. And we also see Al Pacino playing Michael, who is the main character in the second one. The second one is probably my favorite of the Godfather trilogy, and the second one I really love is because it's set in the early 1900s with Robert De Niro's character of Vito, and we also have the modern day time when this film came out with Michael Corleone as the new Don, and kind of just trying to cement his power with his brother and his family. And then there's just lots of really fantastic one-liners in each one of these films that I'm sure you know. There's actually some really fantastic camera work and really great shots and photography that I just absolutely love. There's one scene in particular, scene in that comes to my mind, that of a man approaching a door and a gun being held next to it, and I love that scene so much. There's so many great things about this trilogy, and there's been a million things said about it already, like I said. But, like, you know, moving on from 1974 to 1990, Francis Ford Coppola revisited The Godfather, kind of just to kind of cement this with this an ending, and this really kind of focuses, like I said, on Michael having this empire. We have Sofia Coppola, which might be the weakest link in this film, which is why it's not as legendary as the first two, but it kind of just glosses over some real-life events that happen in Italian-American lifestyles that happen in the 70s and 80s, and that's something that's really interesting. And so anyway, I really love the Godfather trilogy. For what it's worth, this is one of the greatest trilogies of all time. It's two of the greatest films of all time. It's with legendary performances, cinematography. The score is just inviting and just beautiful, and it's super reminiscent of what would come later in The Sopranos and a lot of the Martin Scorsese things. It's just wonderful, and this is absolutely fantastic. And I love these films, each for their own different things, but I just really love how well put together these movies are, and honestly just how crazy these films are too. It's really gritty and realistic, a lot like actually the Sergio Leone films that we talked a little bit about beforehand. It's just really gritty and realistic, and that's what's so cool about it. But yeah, this is hyper-violence at its finest, and I love it. So that's why the Godfather trilogy is my number 4. So let's actually move on to number 3. Alright, moving straight to number 3, we actually have Krzysztof Kieślowski, the Polish director who directed the Three Colors trilogy. We have blue, white, and red, all for different colors of the French flag. And actually, I'll just let you know each one of them. So blue represents liberty, white represents equality, and red represents fraternity. So each one of these films are really interesting. What's so cool about this trilogy is it transcends a lot of different countries. So blue is actually set in Paris, white is set in Warsaw, and finally red is set in Geneva. And so you have this cross cultural boundaries that Kieślowski put together with each of these films, from, you know, Paris to Switzerland and also Poland. So what I really love about this trilogy is its interconnectedness between love and loss, and it's kind of just this human palette of emotion, from comedy to tragedy to all these different types of things that Kieslowski is trying to put together in each one of these films. And they're all interconnected in a weird, really small, minute way, which I think is really fascinating and I really haven't seen in any other trilogy. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of them, and then we're going to kind of just wrap up why I think this trilogy is so wonderful. So the first film is Blue, and this one is Juliette Binoche, who's playing Julie, who is this grieving mother who has lost her daughter and her husband, and it's really just this incredible study on grief. This film is shot in like a sapphire kind of tone, and I'm going to totally butcher this name, so I'm not going to even say it, but I'm going to put it down when I say it right here. This is the person who did the camera work and the cinematography. And then we also have the score by another person I'm going to be putting down here in the description down below, because I can't really pronounce Polish names. But I really love this film because of just how grief unfolds. And I saw this a year ago, and it stuck with me for that, this long. It's just one of those films that just really hits you. And I just really love the work that Kieslowski does here. And it really is just a very compelling thing that you see unfold. And something about grief stories really get to me. And I have no idea why I have this emotional connection to these things. But to me, it really makes me feel at my most human, and that's why I love Blue so much. So let's actually move on to White, which actually is kind of more of the comedic and also the tragic. White is the second film of the trilogy representing equality. We are in Warsaw. We're actually in France as well, but we have Carol, who is played by another Polish name that I'm not going to even say, but he's living in France with his wife, Julie Delpy, who you know in the Before trilogy with Richard Linklater. But we really see kind of Carol as this fish out of water character who is dealing with all these different things in his life, and just there's a lot of things just not fair at all for this character. And this is actually one of the probably the lighter tones of all three of the films. I actually think this is probably the lightest of them, but it's also really gritty in the sense of how tragic a lot of things occur in this film as well. We're really dealing with like this twisted side of the economic system and how people get screwed over in certain ways, and that's kind of what White's a little bit about. So let's actually move on from White to Red. So moving on from White, we actually have Red, which is the final film in this trilogy, and this is the one that the interconnectedness really kind of comes to a head, and you see the connection here. We have Irene Jacob here as our main character, and she is this runway model, and she kind of meets this judge, and a lot of these things, kind of this fate kind of entwines with each of these different characters, and some characters we've seen in Blue and White as well start popping in and out of different things, and that same thing happened in White as well. We saw characters in Blue, and it's weird how things are connected that Kieslowski kind of made. This is actually his last film. He died a couple years after he made this movie, these trilogies. The first one came out in 1993, these last two came out in 1994, which is really interesting because before this he did Decalogue, which was an amazing television series right over there. Fantastic. If you have not seen Decalogue, I highly recommend it. But this is probably my favorite Polish director for a reason. These are the three films that I've seen by him. I have not seen Double Life yet, but I'm really excited to see that. But I really love his output. He really connects a lot of human emotion, like I said at the very beginning, this human palette of emotion, from the tragic to the comedic, to just the everyday mundane connectedness to a lot of the things going on in our lives. And I don't know, you probably resonate with that with when I talked about the War Trilogy and also the Apu Trilogy as well. That's what I love so much about each one of these trilogies, is how much it connects to the deep level of what it means to be human. And a lot of this is really sad and melancholic, but at the same time, it kind of just reminds us of our humanity, and that's what's so great about this movie, and great about this trilogy, in fact. So I highly recommend checking out this trilogy if you have not seen this trilogy. This is my number 3 pick. So let's actually move on to number 2, to a trilogy that I know you know of because I've talked about it before. I even mentioned a name in this trilogy, Julie Delpy. What is that name? Why does that name ring a bell? I wonder why that name rings a bell. The Before trilogy. I've talked about this trilogy quite a bit actually already, but I really want to just highlight a little bit about why this trilogy is so phenomenal in my opinion. Richard Linklater directed this amazing masterpiece of a trilogy with Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy of this young man and young woman who meet each other in Europe and they fall in love with each other, and this really just kind of highlights their journey. And what's so great about this film series, this trilogy, is each one of them is 9 years apart in how it was filmed, and also 9 years apart in the story. So it's really connected that way, and it really plays with time. That's what Richard Linklater is doing. So in this beautiful box set, we have the first one, which is in the very, very back right here. Before Sunrise, we have a young Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy in 1995, and then 9 years later, we have Before Sunset, where they meet once again on some unrelated circumstances in 2004. And then finally in 2013 we have Before Midnight, and this final kind of chapter that definitely ends in a note where there could be a possible fourth. We'll see. If it is become a fourth, then this video is invalid, because you know how I made my rule of, you know, having the same title in a trilogy. But anyway, back to the Before trilogy. Why I love this trilogy so damn much is, like I've said before, this romantic aspect of humanity that is just really, really fascinating. I love interconnectedness between humans, and the good, the bad, the ugly. Here I'm talking about, you know, the romantic awakening in the first film, this kind of fairy tale moment that a lot of us get in new relationships. We are just super hopeful and we're really happy with the person we're meeting. We're connecting, and there's a lot of really great conversations, and everything is just really working out. And somehow it's like we're really hopeful about how we're gonna work this out. And then 9 years later, you see it's like, oh, hey, you remember that time when we were being really hopeful and stuff? It's like, well, what if that actually worked? And then you see this weird playful nature, but between, you know, two people, that maybe this could work. Maybe this could work out. And then 9 years later after that, we see that something did work out, but there's a lot of trouble involved with a marriage, with a relationship. There's ups and downs, and you see that unravel. And I really love that I finally actually saw Scenes from a Marriage, which Before Midnight is actually really related to this film. I actually read that Ethan Hawke and Richard Linklater took a lot of things from Ingmar Bergman in Scenes from a Marriage, which is really cool. I didn't know that. But I can definitely tell now that I've seen that television series. But I really love this trilogy on so many levels for those reasons I just stated. I just love how the time is involved in every aspect of the story. I love how the camera just stays on these conversations. These are conversations that we're all having. These are conversations that we have all the time. There's a little era of pretentiousness in this film, but I think that's okay, and I love it. And I love Ethan Hawke. He's one of my favorite actors of all time. That's why First Reformed was probably my favorite movie of last year. One of the reasons why his performance was just fantastic. But I really love the Before trilogy, and there's a reason why it's my number 2 pick. I highly recommend you checking out this one. So I bet you can have guessed what my number 1 is. I usually have it right behind me. And there is a reason I said Trilogies in the title, and you'll see why in a sec. Okay, so my number 1 trilogy of all time is The Lord of the Rings. And yes, the title, I meant it on purpose. The Hobbit is not related to Lord of the Rings in my eyes. And yes, I may have cheated, and I may have gotten some people be like, wait a minute, the original Star Wars trilogy is not related to the prequels or this new trilogy. I'm like, yes, but it's all about the title and how it's set up, in my opinion. And that's why I love Lord of the Rings. This one's an easy pick for me. These are my favorite films of all time. And I kind of consider them as like a monolith. I really love each one of these movies, even though they're all separate. 2001, 2002, and 2003, we have The Fellowship of the Ring, we have The Two Towers, and we have The Return of the King. This is the extended edition, the only way to watch this trilogy, absolutely 100%. This has some of the best casting choices from director Peter Jackson you'll ever see. This guy, Peter Jackson, came from, you know, these really B schlocky horror movies to this, and how in the world that happened, I have no idea, but I love it. And there's amazing performances all around for a lot of different characters. We have the Fellowship, obviously. There's members of the Fellowship right there, but we have all sorts of different people involved in each one of these films. I'm gonna lose everything. We're just seeing parts of more or less Gandalf, Aragorn, Frodo, and Sam, which is interesting. But anyway, let me just go through each character. So we have this character in Frodo, who is this Hobbit, played by Elijah Wood. We also have Samwise Gamgee. We have Pippin and Merry, which are just all amazing characters. We have Ian McKellen playing Gandalf, who is the wizard who kind of brings everyone together. Another member of the Fellowship, we have Aragorn, we have Legolas, Gimli, and we have Boromir. Aragorn is Viggo Mortensen. We have Orlando Bloom as Legolas. We have John Rhys Davis as Gimli, and we have Sean Bean as Boromir, who is my favorite character. He's my favorite Fellowship member, and there's a reason I love him so much, especially in the extended edition where you learn more about him. There's so many characters and names in this story I'm not even going to mention, but the reason I love this trilogy so damn much is the score is otherworldly. It's fantasy. I've already mentioned a little bit of why fantasy has stuck with me for so long, and I grew up with these films. I watched these movies in theaters when they came out. These movies just have an emotional resonance to me. It has literally every element from most of the genres of film, from drama to horror to suspense to action and adventure to romance. Everything I can really think of is encapsulated in this trilogy. And honestly, the performances, the cinematography, the photography, the concept art, I mean, just everything that goes on behind the scenes is legendary. This is actually one of the coolest behind the scenes editions of the box set. If you haven't seen the extended editions of Lord of the Rings, I highly recommend it. I also recommend checking out the appendices of this particular set. I've seen every single second of it, and it just really gives you behind the scenes of every detail of how amazing this project was. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote these fantastic books right after World War II and really kind of cemented this world, this fantastical fantasy. It's just so amazing, so damn amazing. And that's why I really love this trilogy. There's so many things I could talk about. I honestly could make a whole hour on this trilogy alone. But this is my #1 trilogy of all time. Yes, I broke my own rule, but this is my favorite trilogy of all time, and I hope you enjoyed my top 10 favorite trilogies of all time. I want to know your favorite trilogies of all time. Yes, there are other franchises that I didn't mention. Back to the Future, the Bourne Trilogy. There's a lot of things that I really wanted to talk about, but at the same time, they weren't my favorite. And honestly, with my stipulations, I only have particular things I could talk about. I could have talked about The Matrix, which honestly the first one's the only one to really talk about. But there's all sorts of trilogies that are just really, really damn good. And I want to hear your thoughts down below. What are your favorite trilogies? What do you think of my list? Was I wrong? And anyway, comment down below. Like this video, share this video, hit that notification bell, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. I'm not jonesing around.